the call. Today we have Pam Moore, founder of Compass Human Resources. Pam will take us through the three must-haves for your HR toolbox. We're just giving everybody a last-minute chance to log into the webinar. We plan to get started about 11:03, as I see we still have quite a few attendees logging in right now. Thank you. All right, everybody, let's get started. It looks like everybody is logged in. I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Shauna Dutton, and I'm Better Business Bureau's Business Relations Marketing Lead. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. The BBB webinar series is designed to educate and inform you, our accredited businesses, on relevant Better Business topics. Today, we're very excited to welcome Pam Moore. Pam is founder of Compass Human Resources. She has 25+ years of human resource generalist experience in a wide range of industries, including large chain restaurants, manufacturing, insurance, and environmental consulting. Her areas of expertise include everything from tools and systems to long-range strategic planning. In addition to being a certified HR professional, Pamela also holds a degree in accounting. This presentation will cover many important HR topics, including the use and content of job descriptions, what to include and not to include in a company handbook and why, the difference between job descriptions and job postings and why they're not interchangeable. But before we get started today, I'd like to take a moment to review a couple housekeeping items. First, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit your questions at any time. Simply type them into the box on the left side of your screen. If you're viewing along with others, please designate a scribe to submit your group's questions. We will be addressing questions throughout the presentation. Second, if you experience any technical difficulties, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a link to GoToWebinar's troubleshooting website, as well as a toll-free number to call and listen to the webinar over the phone. Please use them if you're having any trouble hearing the audio presentation. Also, to resolve a problem of the slides not advancing automatically, please try exiting and re-entering the webinar. Also, this webinar is being live recorded. The online archive will be available to you after the live version on our YouTube channel at BBB News, the number 4, and the letter U. So it's BBB News 4U. And finally, we'll be tweeting during the webinar. If you'd like to join in the conversation, and we encourage you to, please tweet at #BBBwebinar or follow us at BBB News for You. Okay, at this time, I'd really like to turn it over to Pam to get us started.
Thanks, Shauna. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to put a bit of a disclaimer on this at the beginning. I've got a little bit of a cold, so if my voice cracks or whatnot, please just bear with me. we're going to cover what I see in my practice as the 3 most critical tools that every business needs with regard to human resources. These are things that serve multiple purposes in your organization. So employee handbooks, job descriptions, written job descriptions, and job postings. Job postings and job descriptions are not the same thing, okay, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'm going to start with the employee handbook and talk about why have a handbook at all. You know, some of you probably are in small businesses that have just a handful of employees and may be wondering whether you need to have a handbook. And if you're under 10 employees, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think anybody with 10 or more employees absolutely needs to have a handbook. And there are multiple reasons for this. It's not just a risk management tool. It's also an internal tool to help your managers spend time working on the things they need to work on and not having to answer a lot of questions that employees could get from a piece of reference material. So I see that we've got kind of 4 areas that a handbook really covers for you. There's consistent messaging, there's compliance, there's risk management, and do-it-yourself problem solving. So compliance is all of the legal stuff that you are subject to that employees need to know and understand. So for example, pretty much every business needs to have a harassment and discrimination policy. Regardless of size, you really need to have that. Those areas continue to be the most litigated areas in business. So you need to have a policy that everybody understands. HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and that used to be just for healthcare, but it really applies to any kind of information that could connect a person to their medical records, so benefits enrollment forms, unemployment claims, anything to do with garnishments and whatnot. All that stuff has certain confidentiality around it, pardon me. And so you need to make everybody aware that if they come in contact with that information, there are certain rules they need to follow about keeping it confidential. We've got family leave. So if you have 25 or more employees in Oregon, you're subject to the Oregon Family Leave Act. If you have 50 or more employees in any state, you're subject to the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. Okay, and so that needs to be written out for people. Now, in Oregon in particular, some new things came in that add to that compliance list this year. And we've got Veterans Day leave. Okay, that's federal. Domestic violence, victims of domestic violence or abuse are entitled to a certain amount of protected leave now. And if you're in the city limits of Portland, we now have Portland mandated sick leave, which is a whole other can of worms that we won't talk about, but it needs to be in the handbooks. 20 or more employees, you're subject to COBRA, which is continuation of your medical insurance. That has to be in there. Okay, and there are a host of other things depending on what state you're in. Particularly Oregon and California have many more laws than federal, and so all that stuff needs to be in your handbook. The other part that kind of ties into that a bit is the risk management area. Okay, so when I talk about risk management, I'm talking about the disabilities issue. Okay, so you need to have information in there about accommodating people with disabilities. Okay, discrimination. There needs to be an EEOC statement in your handbook saying basically we don't make any kind of employment-related decisions based on any protected class. Okay, that statement needs to be in your handbook. All the information about wage and hours, so what your work week is, how you pay people, when they get paid, overtime, You know, when do we get overtime and when do we not get overtime? Okay. Then there are the tools for the managers. Okay, so if all this stuff is written down, there shouldn't be any question that your managers are applying things consistently from one group to the next. Without the handbook, it becomes everybody's interpretation of what's going on. And you don't really want that, especially when it comes to how you interpret some of the risk management and compliance issues. Okay, that stuff's hard and fast. It's not open for interpretation. Okay, so having a handbook, at the very least, you put your compliance and your risk management stuff in there. But also, what you can add into it then is other things that are very helpful to your employees. So, you know, you can put organizational charts in there. You can put parking or transit information in there, things that will help your new employees as they come on board. Okay. Some tips that I like to share for handbooks is to make sure your handbook contains both state and federal compliance information. Some of you may have employees in multiple states, in which case you need to make sure that the employees in each state are seeing the right information. Washington, Oregon, and California, they all have state laws that are different than federal. Okay, and when applying those compliance things, the most lenient law is the one that you follow. Some of them, like family leave, you have to deal with simultaneously. So all of that stuff needs to be in your handbook. Okay, so, you know, my clients who have employees in both Oregon and California, we usually do separate handbooks because California requires so many things. Oregon and Washington are pretty close, and so you can incorporate those things into one handbook and just specify which state on particular policies if you want. One of the things some of my clients run into is, rather than confronting an employee's performance issue, they try to make it sort of passive by creating a policy and applying it to everyone. And I don't recommend that, because what happens over time is that you wind up with a bunch of policies in there that you can't control and can't police, and they're very odd looking over time. Also, if it's really just one or two people that are doing something that you don't want them to do, and you write a policy, sort of a blanket policy to try to cover that, well, all of your employees know who that person is that you're trying to deal with, and they know that you're not dealing with it directly. So that sends a particular message that may not be good for your management over time. Okay, so, you know, if it doesn't truly apply to everyone, don't put it in your handbook. Okay, that's a management issue, address it with the employees. Okay. The other thing is, don't create policies that back your organization into a corner. What I mean by that, excuse me, is things like attendance policies, dress code, discipline. I see people get very, very detailed in these policies, and they have this really, they wind up with a very complex attendance policy or a dress code that gets into, you know, a list of things you can and cannot wear to work. And what happens then is your employees will nitpick that stuff. Well, you know, it's not on the list, so that means I can wear it, right? Or they'll fly just under the radar on that attendance policy. So you don't want to make things so complex that managers can't manage their employees based on the situation, okay? So if you create, say, an attendance policy, you know, leave some room in there to allow for the fact that attendance needs in different groups may be different. And so managers need to be able to manage based on the needs of their teams, okay? And make it useful for the reader, okay? So it's not just a risk management tool. Like I said, put some stuff in there that's useful to your employees. You know, if it's just a legal document with a bunch of compliance stuff, nobody's ever going to read it. if it's useful to everyone, they will. So make it readable, make it useful. Put some stuff that shows what your company is and who you are and how you work. Okay? That makes it a lot more readable, and people will, in fact, use your handbook, which is what you want. You want them to go there. Okay? That was pretty broad. Okay, so do we have questions about anything we've talked about so far?
Pam, we do have one question, and one question it asks, how do we create a broad dress code and implement that into our handbook? What suggestions do you have for dress code?
Oh, okay. Well, you want to think about why you need to have a dress code in the first place. So I'm thinking about one of my clients who has, they have both office employees and they have warehouse employees. And the office, they don't have a lot of walk-in traffic. So what we've done for their dress code is we've left the office fairly broad. You know, they deem their stuff as business casual. So they say we have a business casual atmosphere, which means we expect people to be, you know, clean, well put together. We don't wear jeans to work, but khakis are fine, as an example. So for example, we don't wear jeans, khakis and socks are fine. Okay, we don't wear flip-flops, but you know, nice sandals are fine. Now in the warehouse, there are safety concerns. And so in their handbook, we've put a paragraph about warehouse personnel. And we've left it pretty broad, but basically what it says is it speaks to the safety issue. It says, you know, in the warehouse, safety is our top priority. Okay, so we don't want to wear clothing that poses a safety hazard. For example, so you're always just giving examples so that it's clear that it's not a hard and fast. There are other things that may apply. For example, warehouse employees are required to wear closed-toed shoes. Okay, depending on what area of the warehouse you work in, you may be required to wear a hard hat or other safety apparel. Okay, so we've left it pretty broad. Then you end it by, if you have a question about whether your attire is appropriate for the office or not, please ask your manager. We also have a paragraph in there that says, if the management team determines that your attire is not appropriate for your role, they reserve the right to ask you to go home and change. So that leaves it pretty broad. Okay, does that answer the question?
That's a great answer. It doesn't look like we have any more questions at this point, but hopefully we'll have some coming up.
Okay. Just because we're moving on to another topic, you can still ask questions about the handbook if they occur to you. We've got a couple more stops in for questions, so throw them out anytime you want. We're going to move on now to job descriptions. So, what are they good for? Job descriptions are, I'll be honest, they're not very fun to put together. And unless something happens, they may not get looked at very often, but they're very, very important. When you're putting your job descriptions together, please remember that they are a tool in putting together your job postings. They are not job postings in and of themselves. So if you're just copying and pasting your job description into your job postings, shame on you, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But that's one of the things we use our job descriptions for, is developing a job posting when we have an open position. Okay. The other thing is interview tools, right? So when you're preparing for an interview, you pull out that written job description and you put your interview questions together based on what that person needs to do in their role, right? The other part in the interview process is your candidates should at some point, either before the interview or during the interview, get a copy of that job description, because you're going to need to ask them questions about whether or not they can perform that job. Okay. Part of the questions are reasonable accommodation of disabilities. So in the interview process, you might ask a question that says, is there any reason that you can't perform this role? Or can you perform this role with or without reasonable accommodation? Okay. In your job description itself, it should have some physical requirements in there. Okay. The other part of the accommodating disabilities is if an existing employee has a health issue that could fall into the disability category, you are obligated to go through what they call an interactive process to accommodate them, which means a back and forth with you and them and possibly their doctor to determine what things they can and can't do and what you as the employer might need to do to help them do that job. And so you need your written job description to refer to when sort of redesigning their role to fit their disability. Okay? If someone files a disability claim or they file a discrimination suit against you, the first thing the attorneys are going to want, or the workers' comp company is going to want, is a copy of their job description. Okay? Assessing light duty assignments. So if somebody does get hurt on the job or elsewhere, and you really want those people to come back to work, right? So you can give their doctor a copy of the job description, and the doctor can sit down with your employee and say, okay, well, you can do these things, but you can't do these things. You know, we can make adjustments here, and this is what light duty would look like, and get them back to work, which is what we all want. Getting them back to work sooner helps your workers' comp premiums, by the way, so that's a good thing also. And then, lastly, classifying employees for overtime eligibility. So you may or may not know this. I find that my small business clients, when I first start working with them, 100% of them don't understand what determines whether someone is eligible for overtime or exempt from overtime. The one and only thing that determines that is their job duties. So you need to have a written job description to make a firm assessment, okay? So, moving on, what's in your job description? So, there are certain elements that need to be in your job descriptions. Reporting structure. So it should state which position this person reports to. You don't have to put names in, but put the title, right? Who they report to, and if they're in a management position, which positions report to them, okay? Their pay range. The pay range only if you have structured compensation system for your employees with formal pay ranges for each position, okay? If you have those and you share them with the people in your company, you can put that on the job description. If you don't have that, leave that one out, okay? Pay status, so do they get paid hourly or do they get paid salary? And then overtime status. Are they exempt or non-exempt from overtime? Okay. The key responsibilities. All right, so this is where accommodation of disabilities comes in. If you need to accommodate a disability, what you're looking for is, can this person perform the key responsibilities of the job with or without accommodation? Okay, so the key responsibilities are those responsibilities that if you took them out of the job description, that position would not need to exist. Okay, those are the key responsibilities. Then you have a section for additional responsibilities, and those responsibilities, even if you took some of those out, the position could still exist. Okay, and so by separating those, if you do need to accommodate a disability or talk to someone about, you know, which parts of the job they can perform, at the very least they need to be able to perform all of those key responsibilities. Okay. Then you want their qualifications, okay? How much experience, how much education, what technical skills do they need, all of that stuff. If there's any special education or certifications required, Now, there's a difference between required and preferred, by the way. Okay, required are things like if you drive a forklift, you have to be certified to drive a forklift, right? If you're a delivery person, you may have to have a commercial driver's license, that sort of thing. Those things are required. Then there's the preferred stuff, right? So you're hiring an HR person. Well, PHR, SPHR are preferred things, okay? If it's an upper management position, you may be able to make those things required, okay? And then the physical requirements. Now, physical requirements are kind of tricky, okay? The whole Americans with Disabilities Act requires that we word things in a very particular way. So what you need to do is look at, particularly for non-office positions, okay? You can get away with, if it's an office type position, you can get away with putting under physical requirements sort of the normal expected requirements of an office position. It's pretty broad, but most people get what that is. But any other role that requires, so say, I'll use the warehouse position as an example, they don't really get to sit down, right? If you're working in shipping, you may have to be standing at a counter packing boxes all day, right? Well, you don't want to say that you have to stand for long periods necessarily. What you want to say is remain stationary for long periods, right? Because it doesn't really matter if they're standing. Maybe they could sit on a stool, right? Or maybe they're in a wheelchair, but they could do the job from their wheelchair, okay? But they're not going to be moving around much. Rather than saying, you know, you need to be able to lift 25 pounds, what you want to think about, what are they really doing? It's not just lifting, right? Maybe they're moving boxes from one area to another. So what you're saying is you need to be able to relocate objects weighing 25 pounds or more. Okay? How they get them there may be lifting and it may not. Okay? So that's where people run into the trickiness, but you do need to give people that information in the job description. So excuse me, if they're moving around a lot, if they're staying stationary a lot, if they have to lift things, okay, and if they have to drive or something like that, you'd put those things in the physical requirements. And that way, during the interview process, people can see that in the job description, and when you ask them if they can do that job, then they'll be able to give you an accurate answer and you won't have surprises later on. Okay. Okay, so that was job descriptions. Do we have questions about that?
Yeah, we did receive one question from Deborah, and that kind of pertains to, again, how to understand how to classify employees for overtime eligibility. She gives us kind of a scenario here. She says they're a factory service company. Their technicians work with electrical control panel circuits and are salary, and wonders if that would be an exempt or non-exempt position.
Okay. Those off-site positions are tricky. So first thing to understand is that you do have two statuses. You have pay status, which is hourly or salaried, and you have overtime, which is exempt or non-exempt. Just because you pay someone salary does not mean that they're automatically exempt from overtime, okay? So if you have a salary person, what you look at is their job duties, okay? And there are positions that are automatically exempt from overtime. Outside salespeople are automatically exempt. Highly skilled computer developers and things like that, exempt, okay? Anyone who manages 2 or more employees can be exempt. But in general, someone who doesn't manage other employees, who's just a technician out in the world, probably is eligible for overtime. Okay, but again, that's a federal mandate, and there is information, such as it is. There are a lot of gray areas, but the Department of Labor does provide information on how to classify people as exempt or non-exempt from overtime. Okay, but in Deborah's example, my guess, without seeing the job description, is that that person probably is eligible for overtime. Okay.
Great. That was a great answer. We had another question come in, and it said, for physical requirements, they work at a coffee company where they run outside to get customers' orders and then run back inside. How would you write that as a physical requirement?
Oh, good question. Okay, let me think about that for a minute. So they're going outside and back in. I would just say that they need to be moving between the internal, if it's like a coffee shop, the internal restaurant area, to back and forth between that and people's automobiles that are out in the parking lot or in the drive-through line or whatever it is. Okay, that's all. They need to be able to go between those two things frequently. If it's frequently, right, then say that. That's part of the job. It needs to frequently move between the restaurant area and people's automobiles outside in the parking lot. And then let the candidates, if you're interviewing, let the candidates ask you, well, if I have this situation, do you have a wheelchair ramp? Will I be able to do that in a wheelchair? Whatever it is, they can ask you about that. Does that help?
That was great. And then one final question. What are some examples and some hard and fast rules of things to definitely never include in a job description? Are there a couple to highlight?
Oh boy, okay, let's see. And you ask me these questions and I go back to thinking about client experiences. So I'm going to look. Being so long in the industry, I probably have lots of interesting client experiences. But one thing I can think that you would never ever put in the job description is the exact pay. Okay? You don't ever put the exact pay in there. If you're going to put anything about pay, you put a range. If you're a government employee, they have names for their pay ranges usually, so you could put whatever their code is in there for that range. Pay should never go in there. Nothing that refers to a protected class. You don't want anything in there that's going to refer to, gender or national origin or anything like that. I've had some issues with language, so jobs that lend themselves to certain minority groups, but the people need to be able to read and write and speak fluent English. They can put that in there, that a person needs. You can't ask, but you can inform. So this position requires people to speak, read, and write fluent, whatever the language is. Maybe it's not English, maybe it's another language, okay? You can put that stuff in, but you wouldn't be able to, ask somebody in an interview, what language do you speak, right? I wouldn't make any commitments about promotions or anything like that, I've had some people who want to put in, well, the next level on the career chain is X from this position, but it may or may not be. Each position is unique, so I wouldn't put anything that alluded to promises of continued employment or anything like that, or what the next career step is from that position. But really, you can put anything in your job description that is helping to provide a realistic picture of that role. Okay.
All right, it looks like that's all the questions that we have at this time.
Okay. Well, let's move on to job postings then. So I like my little Dilbert cartoons. Job postings are interesting. And, I'm sure you guys have all seen good ones, bad ones, mediocre ones, boring ones, really cool ones. But in the end, what your job posting is a marketing tool. You have very little space available to you to convey a whole lot of information about your organization. Okay. One thing that I will say you do not want to do is don't advertise what isn't true. So don't paint your company to be this fantastic place to work if it's really not. Okay? Don't make the job out in the same way that people sort of fluff up their resumes. Clients have a tendency to fluff up the jobs. Don't make that job sound super fantastic if it really isn't. Okay? So only say what's true, because what you don't want is for somebody to come into your organization and say, God, this is not anything like what was portrayed in the job posting or the interview process. Because what happens then, you wind up with a sort of disillusioned employee right out of the gate. Okay? What happens during your recruitment process sets the tone for a person's entire tenure at your organization. That can be a good thing or that can be a bad thing depending on how you do it. Okay? So, what I would say is, think of your job posting as a chance to show off your company. Okay? So, tell about what your culture is like. Okay? Or the work environment. Tell them what the company does in the world. And when you do this, I'm talking in a couple sentences, so you need to be very concise, right? What does your company do in the world? You know, who are their customers and what do they provide? Okay? What do you provide to your customers? What do you pride yourself on as a company? Okay? What kind of people work at your organization, right? So if you're hiring for culture, you want to be sure that you give them an accurate description of what kind of people, you know. Is this a group of highly skilled professionals, you know, that cater to, you know, a very specific audience? Are you a creative agency where things are kind of loose and you have fun at work? You know, convey that in a realistic way. And then be sure you tell people how their skills are going to contribute to the organization. Why is this position that's open important to your organization? Okay, what key role does it play in the company reaching its business goals, right? Why is your company excellent? Why do you exist? Why have you exist? Or if you're a startup, you know, what are your lofty goals out here in the world? What are you trying to do that this person with all of their wonderful skills can come in and help you do? Okay? Why should people want to work for you is what you're trying to convey. Okay? So, in looking at this stuff, you can see why just lifting your job description and plopping it in your job posting is probably not going to get you the best candidates out there, right? Because your job description doesn't have any of this stuff in it. Your job description simply talks about responsibilities, right? It doesn't give a feeling for the organization. And honestly, when people are applying for jobs, they tend to apply based on their emotional reaction to the posting, in all honesty. Ooh, that sounds really fun. That sounds really interesting. That sounds like a great challenge, right? That sounds like the kind of company I want to work for. Very rarely will they look at a job posting that is the job description and go, yeah, that's how I want to spend my day every day. They're thinking in a bigger sense when they're thinking about which companies to apply with. And the job market being what it is now, it's moving back to being the candidate's job market, particularly, you know, if you're in tech right now or engineering or something like that, the candidates actually hold more cards than the employers do. And so employers need to make their job postings compelling. Okay. There are a few things that you need to have in your job postings. Okay. You do need to include an EEO statement, which is the statement that says, We are an equal opportunity employer. All employment-related decisions are made without looking at protected classes, right? And there's some specific wording that you can get there, but you need to have that in there, that you don't discriminate based on any protected class, okay? If you do pre-employment drug screens or background checks, you need to put that in your job posting that says, you know, as part of a contingent job offer, candidates will be subjected to a drug test and a background check, okay? If there's travel involved, try to give an accurate percentage if it's a significant amount of travel. Even if it's an occasional amount of travel, you might want to put that in there if, you know, if it's going to happen on a regular basis. Those things are sort of deal breakers, right? That second bullet there about the drug and background checks, that's really helpful to you as an employer, because people who have an issue there will self-select themselves out of the process. So you have fewer chances of going through the whole interview process, getting to a finalist, and then running those tests and having a surprise. Okay, if people know you're going to do it ahead of time. If you use any sorts of skills testing or any kind of assessments as part of the selection process, you need to put that in your job posting as well. Make them aware of what it is that you do. Some of my larger clients use like a personality assessment or a job style assessment as part of their selection process, so we always put that in the job postings that that's part of the deal. Okay. And then people who have issues with any of those things can either ask about it or remove themselves from the process. Okay. Okay, so that's the body of stuff that I have for you. And you can ask questions about anything that we've covered, or if there's something you were hoping to hear that you haven't heard, feel free to ask. Okay.
Hey, Pam, it looks like we had another question come in right at the end of our last question session. And it had to do with what is required of a job candidate or position, and can you require, well, the question exactly is, can you require the position or candidate to be bilingual?
Yes, if it's an essential, if it's one of the key responsibilities of the role. So, you know, if it's a customer service position, and they're on the phones, and you know that you get a predominant amount of traffic in a different language, you need your customer service reps to be able to speak that language, right? Or to be able, pardon me, or to be able to transfer that person to someone who is bilingual. Like I said earlier, with the case of needing to be fluent in English, maybe it's a requirement that the person needs to be fluent in another language. So yes, if that's a key responsibility of the role, if they're not bilingual, that role would cease to exist, then you can require it. Okay? If it's just something that's nice to have, if there's an alternative to it, so they're not the only customer service rep, and you have other service reps that are bilingual, and this person who's not could transfer that interaction to someone who is bilingual, then no, you can't require it. It's a little vague of an answer, but if you think about it in terms of, is there any other way for this person to handle the language issue? If there isn't, then yes, you can require it.
Great. I think that was a great answer.
Okay.
It's not looking like we have any more questions at this time. So, Pam, I just wanted to thank you again for presenting today. And thank you all for attending. And I guess right as I said that, of course, we had one last question come in, so I'm going to interrupt that conclusion and fit this one in. And it's, where do you go online to find the state and federal requirements for handbooks?
Oh gosh, I get this in every HR class there is no one spot. That's the terrible part. If you're the person in charge of people stuff, there is no one place that is going to tell you what you don't know. But that said, there are places you can go. So, number one, if you're in Oregon, the Bureau of Labor and Industries, okay, that's BOLI.gov, BOLI.gov, okay, or there's the Washington Department of Labor or the Washington Employment Department. For federal stuff, it's the Department of Labor. But once you get to those places, you'll need to search for the topic that's a question for you, right? That said, I've put my email address and my website up on the screen. So if you don't have someone like me that you work with, I can send you, if you email me and ask, I can send you a sample table of contents for a handbook. So you can kind of get an idea about what's in a generic handbook. Okay. Some of what's there, depending on how many employees you have, may or may not apply to you, right? And that's what the real thing is. There's no place you can go to find out what's required, because what's required depends on how many employees you have, sometimes on what industry you're in. If you're a federal contractor of any sort, that throws in a whole bunch of other stuff. So there is no hard and fast list of what needs to be in a handbook. But if you can get a sample table of contents from me or someone that you work with like me, that can be a starting point. Okay. Usually what happens when I do handbooks for my clients is we take that sample table of contents and then we have a conversation about the organization and the business and whatnot, and determine which of those things need to be in and which of those things need to be out. Okay. So ask someone like me or ask me, and I'm happy to send that to you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Pam, and thank you all for registering and attending. Please visit us at www.bbb.org to register for any upcoming webinars. We are the Better Business Bureau serving Alaska, Western Washington, and Oregon. And thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.